G'day and welcome to this episode of Ranger Touring. Today I'm going to be doing a 120,000 kilometre review as well as doing a bit of a damage report and sort of things we learned from doing the Cape recently. It's all going to be sort of mashed together and I'll give you some tips and tricks for keeping your Ranger serviced and up to scratch. So on the back end of this trip, the car made it across 120,000 Ks. The trip was broken down into a few different phases, so it was 10,000 Ks overall. Of that though, 5,400 was getting across from Darwin to Cairns. We're now living in Darwin, so we had a big drive all the way over to Cairns. From there, the rest of it was on dirt, bitumen, that sort of stuff, but everything north of Cairns. Of that, it was probably about 3,000 Ks of dirt roads, corrugations, and four-wheel drive tracks. Overall, the car performed to a pretty good standard. With that said, there was a few little key issues that definitely popped up, such as the radiator issue, which we'll talk through. So I have had the car from brand new. It was a demo model. I got it with 600 kilometers on the clock, and I have done every single one of those kilometers since. It has probably had a harder life than most four drives. It does go off-road pretty often. We're not living in Darwin. We got away nearly every second week. So it's done probably almost a third of its life, or maybe just less than a third, on dirt, sand, that sort of stuff. With that said, I do probably service it more than is required. So it always gets a good checkup, which I'll go through. So servicing for it, the forward interval that you normally get with the Ford Ranger is every 15,000 kilometers. I did that for the total of the 5-year warranty, which took me out to about 90,000 Ks. From there, I jumped over to a different servicing interval, which was every 10,000 kilometers. In addition to that though, I don't just service it at the regular service intervals. If I'm going away on a trip, I'll do additional servicing. So from 90,000 Ks onwards, it's done a service every 10,000. Before it goes on a trip, I either get a checkup or I'll try and schedule a major service at that point in time. So everything's getting done. And then where issues have popped up, it's obviously had work done to it as well. I also believe in getting the transmission serviced every 40,000 kilometers. You don't necessarily need to. It does get serviced as part of Ford's scheduled servicing, but I think they don't even touch it until 160,000 kilometers. And if you've ever done any kind of off-roading, you've probably worked your transmission pretty hard, so it's worth getting it done semi-regularly. If you're interested to find out what sort of damage, what issues popped up on the vehicle between here and 80,000 Ks, watch my previous video on it. The link will be in the description below. Since then though, I've had the whole rear brake assemblies replaced. Now I'm going to put that down to an excessive amount of dirt and mud build up in there. When we went out to Kununurra, I got stuck in some sand and I had a bit of trouble with my brakes after that point in time. So I'm going to say that just sort of the built up of dirt, grime, that sort of stuff just really screwed them up. And then as well as that too, there was a bit of a rough idle coming from the car for a little bit. Got it checked, engine mounts were gone or on their way out, sort of with 6 months of life left on them. I did get those replaced. It was pretty expensive as well, but again, very worth doing, noting that we're going to the Cape and we're about to go on a whole bunch of corrugations. I don't know what the life expectancy of engine mounts are. They are just rubber bushings essentially, and like rubber bushings, I assume that they'll just deteriorate over time from heat, changes in temperature, going through water crossings, but also my car's been through a fair bit of dirt, grime, that sort of stuff, so I assume that just wears it down quicker. And so they're just sort of the wear and tear things that have popped up. Overall, I haven't had any major issues since. I will talk through some of the damages that I got on the Cape trip, but I'll save them for that part of the video because they were specifically brought on by that. So having done another 40,000 Ks since the last review, I'm going to kind of talk through some of the key strengths and weaknesses of the car. These will sort of be based off my experiences just on that big Cape trip because that's the longest time we've had to live out of the car for a full duration of time. So first I'm going to start off the comfort. The seats are comfy, the cabin is spacious, it's overall a really good design. It's got plenty of features to keep you happy, comfortable, that sort of thing on long drives. It didn't feel like a chore getting in. Obviously utes are a bit stiffer, but overall really, really good, comfortable design. There is a few features that the Wild Track offers that some of the other ones don't, which may have made it just that little bit better for myself. But with that said, upgrading suspension on a base model will make the car just drive sensationally better, and it overall makes the comfort way better. Next one is gearing. I have always raved about the Ford Ranger's gearing. It's got a 6-speed transmission, which is not necessarily known for its reliability, but once you stick an automatic transmission cooler on the front of it, it really does sort of fix that problem. I'm going to speak a bit more specifically to the low range gearbox. In low range, on downhills, it holds the gearing really, really well. You're able to put it in first and crawl down things at snail pace, which gives you a lot of confidence. With that said though, in low range as well. You've got plenty of power to get up and go. And we used a lot of that hitting some of the sand dunes in Cape Flattery, where you really need to absolutely hit foot to the floor, drop it down a gear, and you had a great ratio to be able to hit the power and get plenty out of it. Again, pretty much a feature that most dual cabs will come with, but the rear locker. So it's got a rear e-locker in the back, which is always reliable. It locks in incredibly quickly, so there's no delay, and it's never given me an issue before. I've never had any issues with its reliability or anything like that. Locker just makes this car exceptional because the traction control system in the front is also quite good. But there's nothing better for traction than a locker. Next one I'm going to touch on is the space. So this car's set out for touring. I've tried to make use of the space as much as possible. With myself and my partner in the front seat, we've got plenty of space in the back to put a fridge, a bit of a false floor and a bit of a design there to really make the space usable. Then the tub's really big, wide and long, and even with the roller shutter, you've still got a really large amount of space. So as a ute, it works perfectly, but it's very customizable. And then the last one is the popularity of the car. Now, being a popular vehicle means that you're going to have better infrastructure around the country. So no one's going to be as good as Toyota, we acknowledge that. But up in the top of Australia, up at Bamaga, we were able to get parts for repairs to the radiator, which, as I'll talk about, didn't hold out. But the Ford Ranger is, again, being the most popular ute around Australia for so many years, has just got infrastructure everywhere. Everywhere is able to get parts, and mechanics are generally familiar with the Ford Ranger, and therefore you're able to get advice or things fixed on short notice, and most people know how to do everything on it, which is really, really good. So definitely a really good thing about driving a Ford Ranger. So the next one I'll talk about is the weaknesses that I've picked up on since the last video. I think the fuel economy is a weakness. When I started driving it, in a stock form, bull bar, that sort of thing, very basic modifications, and stock tyres, I was probably getting close to 800 kilometres to a tank, which is about 10 litres per 100. Now that's already about 2 litres higher than the advertised fuel economy stats for the car. Since then, I'm kind of averaging on a highway, driving at 110, getting about 13 to 14 litres, sometimes slipping into the high 12s. I do have a lot of weight, a lot of stuff on the roof, that sort of thing, so I understand that all adds up. Next one is the technology. Now this is a positive and a negative. It's a positive when it works, and generally speaking, it's been almost perfect in this car. With that said, on the last trip, the speakers shut off on day 2, so I hadn't even made it to Cairns yet, and there was a loud pop, and the speakers stopped working. Turns out the audio control module was toast. Pretty much no one in Darwin fixes that apart from Ford, and there's one Ford in Darwin. So I had a bit of an issue trying to get that repaired, and it was quite expensive, over $2,000 to get that repaired. And then kind of talking to a bit of bushproofing, I'll sort of go into the next topic on this, but for bushproofing, the shut-off mode doesn't work too well. So when you're trying to get towed under dead weight for some reason, say you can't turn your engine on because it's some issue, so in my case it was the radiator and the fan had snapped and pipes were everywhere, I didn't want to turn the car on. One click of the ignition, got all the accessories on, and I got very rough steering and a tiny bit of brake back. Now that was fine. We were 8 Ks from the end of the telly track, and I was getting towed by another Ford Ranger. Now for me to be able to steer, brake, it had to have a few accessories running off the battery. The problem is the Ford, it's almost too smart for its own good. It would turn the lights on the outside when I stopped. Didn't want that to happen, couldn't switch them off. So it was just draining the battery. And then from there, when it gets to a certain voltage, it will actually shut off. Now, if I turn the car off and then turn it back on again, it would sometimes allow me to drive again. But if it's at low voltage, it actually will automatically shut itself off for battery protection. Now in this case, I was actually happy to run the battery dead because I just needed to get off the track. So it's almost got too many good built-in features to then protect the battery and things like that when you're just trying to get off the track. So a bit of a bushproofing thing. Now, I don't know if this is factual as well. My fan snapped going through a water crossing. The mechanic, who sees plenty of vehicles get towed out of Nolans and stuff like that, said, yep, Rangers, it's a typical thing that always happens. That's why we stock spare fan blades for the Rangers. I've been going through a lot of crossings for about 6-7 years now, and I haven't had that issue pop up yet. So maybe I just got unlucky. Maybe it fatigues over time. I'm not exactly sure. But just it didn't necessarily give me the most confidence for bushproofing. But with that said, the other Ford Ranger that was on the trip had pretty much no issues. So maybe I just got unlucky. So talking a bit more specifically to the Cape York trip, what did I get done beforehand? Look, I had a regular service. My 110,000 kilometre service was due. I asked to have anything that was on its way out repaired. So that's when I got the brakes completely redone. I asked for a transmission service to be added on top, which again, I do every 40,000 kilometres. I kind of got it done maybe a little bit earlier than I normally would have, but I wanted a fresh transmission service prior to going on the trip. I got new tyres done. The Maxxis Razors had done about 40,000 kilometres. They were actually still at an okay ratio to probably just go on weekend trips. But for a long trip, a big trip to the Cape, I remember having fresh muddies on last time and I loved it. So I wanted them again. So I got new muddies, exact same tyre, 265, 7516s. And then I wanted to do the suspension again. So I got the suspension done probably about 4 or 5 years ago when I was in Townsville. The car didn't have as much weight on it and the spring rate in the rear was for a 300 kilogram constant. The car weighs a lot more than that now, or needed that, a lot more weight in the back. So I got a 500 kilogram constant in the rear put in, which was really, really good. And it sat perfectly when I both put the trailer on it and then when I loaded the car up, it took all the weight perfectly. Got the front redone as well. I went in with the intention of just getting the front springs changed out to a heavy duty spring, but turns out the plate that holds the spring on the front shocks was actually cracked on both sides. So I had to get both of those replaced. So I pretty much went on the trip with brand new suspension. Now it's given the car a good lift, it's sitting up a lot higher and it works a lot better now. So I'm very happy with that. So I had everything ready to go for the trip. The car was serviced good to go. Now let's talk about the damage. So for the overall trip, I got a few scratches here or there from going, slightly nicking a bank or the side steps taking a bit of a hit. But overall came back in almost the condition that it left in, apart from a few things under the hood. So when I went through the water crossing, the fan blade snapped and I probably lost about half the blades on that. So new fan. The radiator was punctured. So I got a new radiator installed. The fan belt had also copped a few nicks from the blades, so that needed replacing as well. I actually took a fan belt with me as one of my spares. During our diagnosis, the aircon was let go, so that needed to be regassed. And then finally, the audio control module needed to be replaced. So the car did cost me a fair bit of money in repairs overall. So the mechanics in Seisha were able to fix pretty much everything except for the air condition at the time. That was actually really cheap and I got that fixed in Cairns for $350. The radiator, fan belt and the fan itself were quite expensive. Now I understand when you're up there, you're gonna pay premium prices. So I paid between $2 and $3 grand to get that repaired at the time up there and on very short notice. The car was in and out in pretty much 24 hours, which is awesome. I won't talk about the towing bill and my insurance experience. That I don't want to name and shame insurance companies, but however, I went with a insurer who was going to insure me for what I was doing on that trip. If you're interested in my experience, I'm happy to share that with you on my Instagram. You can message me there. So after 120,000 Ks on the car, what would I have done differently and what are the big tips for people who are looking to deck out a Ford Ranger? First one, weight. The Ford Ranger has about a ton of payload. With that said though, that adds up exceptionally quickly. So by the time it's got a full tank of fuel with nothing on it, it is about 2.25, which again gives you about 950 kilos of payload. For a large trip, with the configuration that I've got, I am right on GBM, and I mean like right on the dollar. The weight has added up way quicker than I expected. The car in its current configuration with nothing in the back, a full tank of fuel, and the water tank installed on the roof but not actually full of water, was 2.86 tonne. With a 3.2 tonne GVM, that does not leave me a lot of flexibility. So I was very heavy on the trip, which meant I got bogged more than a lot of the other people. It meant on the steep slopes, the brakes worked for every bit they could to keep the car held up. I think it also then impacted my fuel economy. So the last thing that I would say for the Ranger is the airflow. I've kind of restricted the airflow with a few things that I've added to the car. As you look at the grille, on the right hand side is the BC-DC charger, which again sort of is a fixed panel, blocks airflow. Then you're on the left hand side, I've also got the transmission cooler sitting over there, so again blocking airflow. Then I've got two 9-inch spotties. I wouldn't go any smaller than 9-inch, I think that's the perfect size, but at the same time, the trade-off is it restricts airflow. So what is the so what of all that? On a hot day, the coolant temperatures or the water temperature gets up a little bit higher than I probably would like. I do then sit at 110, even though in the NT you're allowed to go up to 130. If it's early morning or it's a bit cooler, which it very rarely is, I can go a little bit faster and get closer to that 130. But at the end of the day, I don't want to push the car any more than what it's really designed to do, and it sits at 110 perfectly fine. I think I commented on this in the last video when I did the review. My thoughts haven't changed on dual cabs. If I did this vehicle again, I would be replacing the back half of it with an actual canopy, whether that be a fiberglass or an aluminium canopy, as I still think that they're the better way to deck out a Ranger or deck out a dual cab. I've made it work with the rooftop tent and the tub rack, but it's still not as good as it could be. So I definitely would recommend, if you know what you want, go for the touring setup, because I find that people don't really use utes that often if they've bought it more for the forward driving side of the house. With that said though, when I first bought the car, I didn't know exactly what I wanted. I didn't have a lot of knowledge in this area, and as well as that too, I didn't know that this would become such a big hobby of mine, so I wasn't prepared to spend that much money at the time. Now, looking back on it, yeah. After 120,000 Ks, I would still recommend the Ranger to anyone who is interested in buying a dual cab ute. I think that they're a great car and they've got plenty of features and they've been really reliable. It hasn't had any major issues apart from the ones that I've caused when going forward driving. So highly recommend it, and its reliability has actually been really good if you do the right things to keep it a safe vehicle and service it regularly like you should. Now, would I upgrade to anything? Well, I can tell you this, I am upgrading very shortly. I'll be releasing what that is, but stay tuned. You've got 6 months more of videos of this vehicle before it'll be unfortunately out of the driveway, and I'll have something else parked there, but we'll talk about that later. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Ranger Touring.